All right, thanks for coming to Meet Commerce 2.0. Real quick before I begin, so we can give a few more minutes for everybody to trickle in. Who here has used Drupal Commerce before? All right, about half. Who has built an e-commerce site with any other CMS platform, such as WooCommerce or Magento? All right, cool, so we have a crowd. Who came here because they've never built an e-commerce site and is looking what they can do in D8? Boom, all right. So this is going to cover all of those interests. So to start, talk about myself a little bit. My name is Matt Glaman. I am mglaman on Drupal.org. You might see me in some of the issue queues. I am a senior Drupal consultant at Commerce Guys, co-maintainer of Drupal Commerce, Commerce Kickstart, and Too Many Contribs to name, and author of the recent, well, it was March, but the Drupal 8 Development Cookbook, the first D8 developer book out there. So if you're looking to dive into D8 and you haven't figured it out yet, it's a decent resource. Before I begin, I do want to talk about Commerce Guys a little bit because we did do a really recent change. Previously, Commerce Guys and Platform.sh were like one and the same. You know, they were under the same umbrella. Recently, we did a spin-out. Platform.sh is now their own company, doing their own thing, and Commerce Guys separated and sold our services team. Actual House in France bought our services team over there, and Acromedia from Canada bought our US-based team. So Commerce Guys is now Ryan, Boyan, myself, and our new hire, Doug. And we are focused on just the Drupal Commerce product and not services, because we don't want to compete with the people building Drupal Commerce. We want to help you build it and help you make your clients happy.
Could you speak a little louder?
Yes, sorry. So again, to touch on that, so Commerce Guys is now focused on building the Drupal Commerce product through technical partnerships and by helping those who actually build Drupal Commerce sites via architecture, consulting, and performance items and such.
I'm still having problems hearing you.
All right.
I can hear really well up front. There are some
Yeah.
seats.
I think that's about as good as I'm going to be able to get.
Yes.
Sorry.
I think it's your low voice, man. You know,
Yeah,
I don't have a solution for that either.
All right, so Drupal Commerce. Drupal Commerce is a native e-commerce framework for Drupal. It lets you power truly flexible e-commerce in your content management system. So to start with Drupal Commerce 2, we really have to look back at what was learned from Commerce 1.x. History about myself, I started doing Drupal 3 years ago. My first Drupal site was a Drupal Commerce site. So I learned through the trials and tribulations of first building with Drupal Commerce. The main thing that we've learned is we need to be the e-commerce experts and not expect you to be. You should be able to take this product and build an e-commerce store without knowing all the delicate intricacies that go into building an e-commerce site, such as giving you good default configurations, and good default user experiences. So we want Commerce 2.x, you can take that and already have the groundwork started so you can deliver to your client that e-commerce experience that they are expecting. And that's probably one of the biggest changes beyond, harnessing D8 and all the other awesome things we bundled in, but we realized that we need to take care of all of you a lot better. So where are we now? I want to do a status check real quick. So like I said, built from scratch on D8 to reuse the entity system, because Drupal Commerce was one of the first adopters of the entity system in D7 before it existed. Well, now it's in D8, so we're built from scratch there. Alpha 4 was released April 28th, right before DrupalCon. The payment system is currently being finalized. We're like this close. Unfortunately, there was a mishap that set us back a few days in Milan. But the beta is coming soon. And what that means is with the beta, there will be beta-to-beta upgrades, but in our alpha process, you might have to reinstall if we make a schema change to like products. But don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds, because I'm currently on an enterprise D8 commerce site, and I believe there's at least 3 others in the wild, and all of these are slated to launch by September. So you can start. It's just, we don't have beta to beta, so if you export your config, you just got to reinstall. So content might be gone, but if you're using like a PIM and you're just importing from an external source, thumbs up, you're good to go. Okay, so let's first start on the groundwork, because commerce is always about working on the other contributed modules that give it its oomph. First, obviously Drupal core. We require 8.1.0. This is kind of old news now because 8.2 is going to be around the corner. But when we first started, this was a big change because it provided better composer support. We backported. The entity module still exists in D8, but only as a sandbox to improve core. And 8.1, almost half of that code got put into core, so we do require that so that way the entity system is more robust. Other core fixes are needed as well. One of the big things about Drupal Commerce 2 is the libraries that were built when everything started back in July 2014. Taxes, addressing, internationalization, and zones are all put in libraries so that they can be sourced to the PHP community at large. So Drupal Commerce, again, being an early adapter project, one of the first to get off the island. To solve these aren't Drupal problems, these are e-commerce problems. And so there's actually 2 software as a service e-commerce platforms using our libraries, FoxyCart and Kong. So they're taking advantage, I believe, of the tax library and internationalization. So you are getting fixes by enterprise customers or enterprise users at large. And we're helping them too, because this is open source. The video's not uploaded yet, but Drupal Dev Days is going on in Milan. It's actually just wrapping up, but Boyan keynoted there and talked about this essentially, like working with PHP libraries, communities at large. I really recommend it because a library is just not sharing code, it's sharing ideas and concepts and each other, and it's kind of embraces the idea of open source as a whole, right? Just because we're Drupal open source doesn't mean we don't have things in common with other open source communities that aren't even PHP. We'll touch on that in a moment. We do require a composer because we have libraries, and composer is the de facto way to work with external PHP libraries. So adding commerce to an existing D8 site, I was really excited to update that URL before there was Drupal packages, a contributor inspired or contributor maintained packages repository for Drupal.org projects. Composer is now an alpha on Drupal.org. Woohoo! But it's not added to core's composer.json yet. So this might mean if it gets added in the 8.2 lifecycle, we may end up requiring 8.2.0, so that way we have a normalized way of installing commerce. But for right now, if you wanted to get started, you could do composer config repositories, add that, then go into your, this is inside your Drupal root. Composer requires Drupal Commerce 2.0 dev. It'll download all of your dependencies and our libraries, and your Drupal site will be thumbs up, ready to rock and roll. Or the even easier solution, we have a project base. This gives you a simple profile that will install, enable all the modules, sets up your whole doc root. And this is based off Webflow's project, the Drupal Composer project base. I can't remember its exact name, but it gives you a fully structured doc root. We do have a new docs site that I will touch on at the end, but I have a nice little link here for if you come back and look at the slides that will walk you through this. Again, going on to contrib inline entity form, it was built in Commerce 1.x. There was a really weird way of managing variations, and people didn't like that there's 2 streams. I don't blame them. So inline entity form was built to help put in user experience changes in Commerce Kickstart. Lo and behold, now in D8, it is a much more refined module, and it's actually been adopted by the Media Initiative. So it's a shared contrib now. Before it was used in Commerce, then it really grew out. I believe Paragraphs is using it as well. And I've heard rumors that people want to try to get it into core in like 8.3 or something, or some variation of it. It's not beta ready yet because before beta's tagged, there is going to be revision and translation support because multi-version, I believe, wants to use it as well. Or there's going to be a whole extended use case. We have Profile, which is actually Profile 2 in D7 land. It's the D8 version. We're using this to replace customer profiles because in D7 we had our own entity, and that there was kind of a reuse, but some people use Profile 2 and then that, and they had all these duplicate things. And the nice part about using Profile is the whole idea of like an address book, we've actually ported into here. So Commerce address book is gone. We'll have native support via the profile module. And there's at least 1 or 2 CRM projects for D8 that have already started to use profile and backported their patches. Which, how do CRMs and e-commerce, well, it's all about data, but also B2B. I feel that it really enhances the B2B aspect, because how a CRM treats its customer profiles, you would have some of that in B2B. State machine. So this is new to Commerce, and this is actually a new way for state machine to work. There wasn't a D8 port yet, but we use state machine to control the way things move. So if you're familiar with the project management system, an issue has a life cycle. It goes from A to B to C. You can't just say it's A to D. So we use state machine in various ways to ensure that an entity moves through a life cycle.
So is that replacing all the stuff that used to be done by rules in Commerce?
No. I will touch on where we use this in a moment. But no, rules actually isn't in this slide deck because we haven't built integration with rules yet. But Commerce right now is not as dependent on rules as it was in 1.x. Hate it or love it. I kind of love it a little bit more that way. But everybody has their opinion. Address. So address is the heir to address field in D8. It's kind of what it should have been in the first place because now it uses our libraries. Internationalization is boring. Addressing is boring. Zones are boring. But it's difficult work that involves a lot of data. So this taps into our libraries to provide a robust address solution inside of Drupal. What it gives the address field so you can put in an address. But the beautiful part is that there's formats. So you can support any country's format, and as unique as it is, and with our new flexibility in D8, you can support China and Brazil, which have multiple layers of subdivisions. The D7 version didn't fully support China or Brazil because their addresses are so deep. Now you can fully customize it. Let's say that all of a sudden a new country happens, and you want to support their address format because it is out of this world. You can write it. Mars, yes, we need to be able to write Mars's country address format. Boom. We can do that. And these are all imported as well from our library. Zones. So this is great. When you do taxing or shipping, you have these areas, these territorial portions that represent where you ship to and you charge this much. So that's where our zoning library comes in. You can create like this is my custom nexus, and it says if it's in the zone is in EU or in California, it falls into this trap. The biggest use case is taxing when shipping products. When you ship something, if they're within your nexus, wherever you ship from, you have to charge sales tax. So if you have a nexus in Minnesota, if you are in Minnesota and ship from Minnesota, but I ordered it from Wisconsin, I wouldn't pay sales tax, but somebody in the Twin Cities would. In complex solutions, you have 3 distribution centers. We would just make a zone that says Oklahoma, Minnesota, New York, right? And if they fall into that, you know that you need to trigger the tax system. So this will make a great UI for taxing, shipping, and any other things that could crop up. All right, so that's all the base stuff right there in the contributed modules. I don't think anything. I touched on rules. We haven't really built rules integration yet, but that will be part of like the message stack for sending emails, discounts. Shipping is probably going to use it. Our current payments doesn't require it, so there's a lot of Commerce is just running, and rules we use to just enhance it in its current form. All right, so currencies and pricing. Currencies have totally been improved. It's based off our international library, which is based on the CLDR data. I want to circle back to when I said that it's open source, and it doesn't matter if we're PHP or not. This is that's addressing. We didn't contribute to CLDR. We contributed addressing, which I'll circle. The address data is maintained by Google. There was an error in it. Boyan got access to write a patch, and we're technically contributors to the Android SDK. So open source is open source. You can cross barriers. But the new pricing supports internationalization based on locale, because how a currency is formatted in German and Austria is different than German in Germany. So we have robust formats, and there's a great blog post on this. We have these story sessions, and I have a link at the end of the slides to all the tags. But this way, D8, if you haven't used multilingual in D8, it is so smooth, it is so amazing, and just works. Like, woohoo. Well, we made sure that it works with our pricing formats. And you don't really have to configure this because it's pulled in from our library, which pulls it in from another library. You just get it out of the box and you can customize it. Taxes. First, I want to open up with taxes are hard, especially for us here. I'm sure the whole zoning thing and talking about nexuses kind of went in a giant circle. So to start, even though we provide a tax solution, I highly recommend you integrate with a third-party service such as Avalara because they do the math for you and they are cheap in comparison to screwing up your taxes and not charging properly. Unless you have a good tax person and it's like a long-established system and you're thumbs up. If you are that comfortable, we give you a great solution to do that. That is a little bit easier because it can be predictable and defined by rules, which we actually import with our tax library. And it is designed for fluctuating rates, that if you know at this date it's going to bump up 1%, the model just does it for you. So that more predefined tax rates will come. We have tax resolvers, so that way if it's B2B, B2C, however it's tagged, can figure out what tax to apply to it properly. So that way in our UI, when you can define tax rates and tax amounts that you define, it can sort it all out. But again, taxes are hard. If you can, please find an outsourced solution. Stores. So this is new in Commerce 2 because we didn't have a fully baked entity system in D7. So now we have stores that support multiple stores out of the box, which means you can do an Etsy type deal, or if you're an international company, you could actually build each continent's store to be able to identify certain things. What used to be a global setting, such as like the site email and lack of store phone, store address, we now have. So each store can have its own address, its default currency, its email. So we don't have a telephone by default, but you can enable the telephone module that's in core, add it to your store. And also you can support different supported billing countries. Each order belongs to one store. Store can't be for two different orders because you don't go to two stores and order something. There's been people that have argumented against it. I say, well, if you order things from two stores, they technically did a drop ship to the other store, and it didn't look like that to you. But products can belong to multiple stores. So let's say you have a US and Canada store. You can sell to that continent, but let's say you don't want to do over-the-sea shipping. So the European store, you can't get it from the US side. We have another blog post on stores. We have one Drupal console command, because if you're using D8, I highly recommend using Drupal console, just because it's based on Symfony console. I think it's a little bit more maintainable. It's easier to run commands. This lets you generate a store off the bat, which I use this all the time when setting up my sandbox site, because I don't like clicking in the UI. Because if you click in the UI, you have to import your currency, you have to do a few other steps. This just gets you rolling. And also, if you don't want to set up some kind of migrate, or you're like have to bulk import stores for somebody, we got a command to do that. So products, touched on products a little bit about how they work with stores. But products are made, how we define a product is a product contains variations, and those variations are made up of attributes and prices, such as color and size. The best way to explain this is I have these pair of jeans, but when I went to the store, there's a shelf. But there's 12 jeans in there, but each jean is a different size, or there's two of one size. Each of those sizes is a variation. Your product is that thing that represents it. Same when your picker goes to your warehouse, you don't have that blue medium t-shirt and like your small one, like this one pallet, and then you can just go grab one thing, and it just is that. You have this organization. Each thing is its own SKU. Drupal Commerce is built around that idea that one SKU is one thing. A product contains multiple variants of those SKUs. Then to go into product attributes. So First to actually go back to products. In 1.x, we reused the node system to define products, and that made a really confusing user experience. Because you're like, oh, I'm editing content that's supposed to represent my product, and then before there was in the inline entity form, you edited here, then here. Now it's a unified system. You edit your product. That concept of variations doesn't even have its own screen to list them. You edit your product and then your variations in it. So I only touch on it to let people that have experience know that the architecture is mostly the same, but that form is so much simpler, which is so much better for your client and so much better for you.
So are you implicitly saying the product is now its own entity type?
Yes.
It's not node anymore?
Product is its own entity type. I try to avoid some of the deeper technical things, but sometimes it goes. But yes, it is now its own entity type with its own special methods that make sense. In 1.x, an attribute, we pushed people to use taxonomy terms as a reference. So that way you could add, delete, do more things. Now it's its own entity type as well. Go D8. Why is that cool? Because we can do this now. So variations now have their own, or attributes now have their own edit form, where you can pick how it gets rendered on the add to cart form. You have this simplified way to add and remove items instead of having to like click through to, I want to add like a different size. Wait, I have to go to the taxonomy menu? It's like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's confusing. So now you just click edit on your attribute. And what's great about making it our own fieldable item is that you can add fields to it. So you can add an image, right? So that, you go to an e-commerce store, you pick a color and it has that image swatch to either be like a hex code or something. We support that out of the box now. And Commerce in 1.x, you need to like field extractor and like fancy attributes and all this configuration. There's a blog post up on how to actually enable that out of the box commerce. Just install color field. One thing that's not covered in the slides, so I talked about the add to cart form. I just recently got it committed, where there's an overview. So if you build a catalog, you can show like all the variants to display with an attribute overview. So when they're browsing their catalog, they see all the unique color swatches. So that's something that's going to be out of the box. So those are two huge things that everybody expects in an e-commerce store that we didn't give you in 1.x, but in 2.x, it's a few clicks away. So again, making sure you deliver an experience your customer is really wanting without all the headaches, or hopefully not as many. Variation types. So you have different products. So you have different product types. You will have different variation types, such as jeans, pants. Maybe you want to have them separated. You have bags. You have clothes. However you want to discern them. You can have it automatically generate the title for you when you add variations, such as it'd be my green shirt small, my green shirt medium. If you want to add an attribute, you just click a checkbox and hit save, and we generate that field for you. So no longer do you have to go through and say, I want an attribute. Well, let me add a term reference field. Check these buttons to make sure it shows up in the add to cart form. You just click a button and hit save, and we do everything for you behind the scenes. Again, which is why I'm really excited about the new product attribute architecture, because I feel that was one of the longest things to set up. So yeah, we've made that much easier for you, and that can be exported in config, so when you import it, it should automatically add those fields as well. So when you're exporting your site, that's why alpha is not that scary, because we have that there. So if you're starting to build the site in alpha, you export your configuration. When you do like Drupal config import, it'll import the bundle, read that those checkboxes are there, and add those fields, and it'll just be there for you. Orders. We now have order type support, which I think is great because sometimes stores are complex and have different kinds of orders, namely physical and digital. Sometimes you want them to do different things. We have workflows. So I like to compare it in 1.x. When it came to editing an order, it's like you walk to this wall and there's levers, right? You can just grab all the stuff you wanted and you can change all these things, and it didn't tell you what to do. So one of those biggest changes is workflows. An order has to go from draft, which means it was created, it's got to go through checkout, the admin has to actually put stuff in it, to completed. Right. So draft, we have different workflows available for them. available, but the basic would be like draft to validation, right? It went through checkout, you need to fulfill it to complete it. You can't go from draft to completed because it needs to be validated. You need to ensure you have all your products that need to be shipped. You need to make sure that the authorization went through and didn't bounce. So you can't just go to a drop down and, yeah.
I was just, whenever you were had a break, I was going to ask a question about the workflow.
So here, I'll go real quick. So in 1.x, there was a drop down that you could literally say like this was a cart and it went to completed and skip all the steps in between because there were no steps. We now have that path you have to go down, which means that you can then inject into those steps. They're triggered via transitions, so you can say this order is completed. Well, it has to have come from the validation state, and that moves it to completed. So it's much more strict in how orders work, which the end goal will be to have buttons. You just click a button, right? Like you only have a button to go back if it's allowed, and a button to go forward if it's allowed. Not all these options to pick from.
So my question was, does the workflow initiative impact the work here?
I have no idea. I remember that I first was seeing if Workbench was going to use State Machine, but I think there was so much bike shedding and so many issues around creating an abstract workflow that, you know, we had started this, and then it was, I believe Boyan was on like the Aqua calls with the Workbench porting.
Workbench moderation.
Yeah, and it just went nowhere. It went some places, but the needs are so specific on both ends that it was so hard to break it down. But this, honestly, State Machine in its current form is very simplistic and could be used by anything. That I'd love to see that it's adopted and not just, you know, a commerce thing. But I don't think it's going to happen in D8, maybe in D9. Like when things come in port, but we're also not going to have a huge porting problem in D9. So, yeah, I'd like to see it. With some more direct items, place timestamp. So after I got into Drupal, I had to use commerce reporting, which didn't work very well, and I became maintainer. That was my entry into the Drupal community. And then I wrote a patch, or talked to Ryan about a place timestamp. Like, how do you know something completed checkout? Like, when did it stop being a draft and become something that was finished or going to be finished? So now we have the place timestamp. When an order leaves draft state or is marked completed, it now has a timestamp of when that happens. So if you need to run reports against your e-commerce solution, it's there. And 1.x, the workaround was on checkout complete to change the created timestamp because we couldn't introduce a break and change. But it was a workaround. Now we actually have an explicit field that lets you know that this order reached the state in which you say it's done. And we now have order level pricing. Before, when you would edit an order, it would automatically suck in the price from the product, so you couldn't really customize the product's price to give like a discount. Also, the new thing is to create an order, this gift that's been going. Like I said before, the old form was like levers. So like I brought up before, the form wasn't very intelligent. Now when you create a new order, you have to, if there's multiple stores, pick a store, and then pick your customer, where you can either search for existing or just create a new one based off an email address. And then if you want, you can automatically say that it was placed. Now this was done after about like a week of researching BigCommerce, Shopify, WooCommerce, everything we could find, and the bottom line was let the people pick a customer first, which we actually had a contrib in D7 that kind of did this, but now it's out of the box, which is great. The order edit. So again, when you go to edit here, the only thing you can do is add line items. And you'll be able to pick the billing profile, which we need to work on that widget. But otherwise, it just gives you information about the user. You know, you can save it as change it to be a card if you want. But down in that area with save and delete, that's where you'd see like move to completed, or like send to validation, whatever the next transition would be near those buttons or like on the order overview. We're still finalizing that, but that's where we're making it more explicit, where instead of being able to just edit everything, you have to click a button that says reassign customer to change who it's for, and that would change that info there in available billing profiles. So that way you can land where you are and actually know what you're supposed to do, which I feel is a big problem in 1.x. Carts. Really excited about carts too, because as I pointed out, cart is a flag. Now, I think the biggest use case of this is for customer support engineers. You know, you get a phone-in order. How do I place this order for a customer and let them check out? There's a lot of different ways to do it in 1.x. Well, now, your support person can create it, which will be a draft, and save it as a cart. Well, if that Boolean's checked, that means it shows up on the cart page. Well, now we support multiple carts. In 1.x, you only saw your latest cart. Like, there was no way to check out a specific order unless somebody gave you a link and you were logged in. Headache. So now, hey, I need to place this order. I already have a cart started. It just so happens to be, well, the person on the other end creates the order, saves it. I refresh, and now I can check out with my Learn How to Drupal Commerce DVD, even though I already had this cart started. So that's the biggest benefit I see it being, is admin-based workflows. Creating orders as an administrator for your customers and letting them check out. This is a huge solution, I feel like. But multiple carts is important, because what if you run like an Etsy type marketplace with multiple stores? Well, each order belongs to one store, and if they're shopping for multiple stores, you need to be able to allow them to pick what they're going to check out with, which that allows us to support. We have different configurations for the cart, such as the cart form view, what we were just looking at, so that you can customize it. And this is per order type. So let's say you have a digital product, a digital order. Well, you want the shopping cart to look different because you know what products it will contain. But then your physical one, like, you want to show it because it has t-shirts, so you want to make sure you show the image. And let's say if it's a product you want to show, or a digital product, there's some aspect that you want there. Shopping cart block, which will be next. And then some of the cart refresh stuff, that has to do with pricing, which we have not implemented quite yet. And here's a quick GIF. So to add the cart form, the new block actually has a drop down that lets them see what's going on here. I need to update this because we've done some really cool things with the add to cart form. So the add to cart form is now in 1.x. The add to cart form was really hard to edit. If you wanted to override it, you had to copy paste everything. You had to rewrite the whole block of code and field formatter. The whole system is now built on Drupal 8's form displays and field widgets. Now, if you're not familiar with D8, the concept of a view, like the display mode and the view modes, now have a form side of it. So you can customize how an entity's form looks. And well, in Drupal Commerce, when you purchase that product, it's represented as a line item in your order, right? You know, you're not actually taking that, like you are taking that, but it's represented by a thing, which an add to cart form is really the entity edit form for a line item that will be attached to your order. So that lets us let you customize the add to cart form with the form display mode of your line item type. So if you want to let people change the quantity, drag it on up. If you don't want people to be able to set the quantity, you know, they can only get one at a time, don't show it. If you have a custom field, such as, let's say you do trophies, or people can buy cakes online and put a picture of their cat and stick it on there, add an image field and show it. This will let people upload images attached to the line item, which means that when they get their cake order, they can put their cute little cat on the top. And so the purchase entity, like selecting the attributes, is actually its own field widget as well. This does a lot of back-end logic to say these X amount of inputs is actually driving down to this one variation. You know, if I pick blue, well, everything that's blue but all the other things. What's unique about that is then you can customize it. If you don't like the way that our attribute selection works or how people are picking products, change it. There's actually, in April, I did a talk down in Chicago, and somebody brought up, well, what if we want to use a remote data source for this? Like, we don't actually have things stored in Drupal, but we want to have the products there to check out. I was like, well, there's a lot more to it, but you just make a new field widget that reads your remote data and goes about it that way. So it opens up the flexibility, but also simplifies how you set up your commerce site. The shopping block. shopping cart block. So in 1.x, we didn't give you a shopping cart block. You had to make it yourself. Unless you use Commerce Kickstart 2, then you use the default one there, and we're stuck on Commerce Kickstart. So as I brought up, it now has a drop down, and if you have multiple carts, it shows each cart. It has a max height setting of like 350 pixels, so it doesn't take up the whole page, and it's scrollable. You can customize it to say items, item. There's actually a patch in review to make that smart, so it's item or items based on how many there are in it, so it can actually take care of plurals for you. You can choose to not display the contents in the drop-down. We have it enabled as yes, because everywhere that we looked, on like 100 e-commerce sites, everybody has it drop down when you click on it. And also, you might notice there's a little shopping cart. Everywhere we looked, everybody had that icon. So we gave you a default one, but using the new library system in D8, that's actually its own library and own CSS file. So all you have to do in your theme, if you don't like it, is override it. And we actually have the CSS that gives you this layout structure as this other one called layout. We have layout and theme. So if you need to adjust this, you don't need to start adding like exclamation point important and be like those darn commerce guys and my CSS. Just override our layout to what you need it to be. So we kept our themers in mind. And it's also a view, as you saw in the order settings. You can pick what the view is. So you can clone this, customize it, do whatever you want, edit your order type, and go there. Which is cool because if you have digital and physical product orders again, they look different in the shopping cart. If, let's say, you do have like a mixed store. Checkout. Checkout landed right before DrupalCon. I think it was Alpha 4, and we have a lot of goodies that need to be committed. So some of the stuff you see now, you only get on Dev, which I always recommend checking out Dev and playing with it. So checkout is configured per order type. That means your checkout flow is different based on what they're purchasing, which is huge because I've had a lot of implementations where I've had to do some really hacky things to customize how the checkout works based on what's in the order. So I know that this made me really happy in implementation. You notice that configuring it, we borrowed the field config UI. Unfortunately, field UI and all those concepts were not abstracted, so we had to rewrite all of it basically, or Boyan did. But this allows you to drag things from different pages, different steps. That's one difference. In Commerce 1.x, we called each of these groupings a page. In 2.x, they're called steps because you can do a one-page checkout. Everybody loves a one-page checkout. Before you do it, make sure it's not against the law to do it. In EU and Germany, you need to have a review page, so you need to at least have a 2-page checkout. Which is why we give you a multi-page checkout from the start. But we do give there is a way to do a single-page checkout. So in here, if you need to customize your pane, you click the cog, just like your field widgets and field formatters. It opens up, lets you configure it. The login or continue as guest. Like, I don't want to allow guest checkout. Click config, uncheck it. You get rolling there. Everything's using the new plugin architecture, which means that you can extend and easily modify it and create your own versions of it. Shoot, you can even write your own checkout form that doesn't use this, and it's just form API. One of the projects I'm working on, one of the checkout things, I just did that because it's so simple. I don't need the whole pane system. I just made my own checkout flow plugin, and I wrote the form API code to just render a form. So if you are one of those that likes to just write it and get it done, you can bypass the UI. So here's the GIF going through the checkout process. Acromedia, who I brought up before with the spin out and selling the service team, has been extremely helpful in UX. They have a lot of front enders and UX people and have helped do a lot of research into here. So as you'll see as it goes through, it should be set. So when you go to checkout, the first thing you do is log in or continue as guest. If you click continue as guest, it asks you for your order information, which is your email. And one thing we added too was the order summary. So when you're in checkout, you have a sidebar. We are going to give you a 2-column checkout out of the box. You can change the CSS. It has the media queries. But this way, you have an order summary that can show the details, and that can change. We spent like 2 months on checkout user experience research. which, sorry for all the abandoned carts, Amazon and everywhere else. But which actually we learned a lot of insights about abandoned cart emails, which I would love to see go into court too, because man, my inbox was like, there's actually a PR2 to allow registration here. So if you force login, you could have it show the registration form instead of continue as guest. So I think checkout's going to be huge. That's what we've been finalizing and really pushing, because I think that was also one of the hardest parts to configure, and that's when you're most critical. If your checkout stinks, your conversion rate goes down the tube. And then you don't make money, and then you're going to get mad at Drupal Commerce because it's like, you're supposed to make me make money. Payments, we're working on that right now. There is a public branch that you can look at, poke around at it. We are not using the payment module. A lot of people ask us, why don't you just use payment module? Because there's philosophical differences and also integration pain points. It's still its own submodule, but there still needs to be somewhat of control and integration. And like I said, philosophical differences on the code structure. We're going to have tokenized payment support, which means card on file and saving payment details out of the box. That's how it just works. So even if it's a one-time payment method, it gets stored in some way. Now, this isn't violating PCI because it's a token. We're talking to your payment gateway, which is already saving a remote reference ID, and we're just saving that. So now you can save your customers' credit cards, let them have different payment methods, all of that out of the box with Commerce Payment. And we've actually I've been working on a project integrating with an enterprise subscription service and taking some of their ideas on how they handle payment methods, bouncing it back with Glaman. So which is great because some of our initial ideas have been already validated by the service, which means we're going on what this long-term company has been doing for quite a while. Our first payment method will be Braintree. They actually help sponsor part of this, and their module will be the first on it. Authorize.net will be right behind it because the 3 projects that need to go out the door need it. So that's that. Offsite payments, iframes will have much better support. We're working on a way to unroll the whole stack and force a redirect right now. There's just a lot, it's all technical details and nothing really cool to show off at the moment, but we're very close to having it, and it's going to be a very robust API. How many here have wrote a payment gateway plugin or worked with one at all for Drupal Commerce? Right? Nightmare?
Yeah,
right?
it's worse than a nightmare.
Yeah, worse than nightmare. It's like copy paste this code and hope that their example was great. Now we have a more strict API. You extend a plugin, all the methods are there. That's one thing. Anybody that tells you like D8's scary because of OOP, no, OOP is great. OOP makes you write better code, it makes things encapsulated, it makes life easier, and by having object-oriented programming, we can give you that base code and we can tell you how to implement the payment gateway. And also, because D8 uses Composer, half these payment gateways provide their own SDK. Now, if they're good or not, that's a different question. But really, all your Drupal Commerce 2 module should be doing is saying, hey, Drupal Commerce, here's how you talk to the SDK. Oh, Drupal Commerce expects an authorized refund and capture method. Well, here's how you call it to the SDK. Your lines of code should be from like 1,000, 2,000, if not more, to like, I hope like 400. You know, and that's because that's not including white space. But, it's going to be really exciting. Don't hold me to any of those lines of code quotes because it's not finalized yet. So the big thing is, get involved and join the fun. We need contributors. You know, who here thinks that there's like 5 people working on this full time, or even more? There's 1.5. Boyan's full time. I'm part time. You know, there's a lot of thoughts that Commerce Guys is this like 200-person company. It was like 30, mostly platform. People thought that there's all these people working on Drupal Commerce. Well, it was Ryan for 1, and Boyan for 2. Now I'm like part time on 2. So we love contributors, and that also means that you get an influence on what happens. Remember, early adopters get louder voices. The more stable something becomes, the quieter your voice becomes, because it's stable. It doesn't want breaking changes. So the one way to get involved is Wednesday at 3 p.m. GMT +1 in Drupal Commerce on IRC. We hold office hours. So that's actually like 9 a.m. our time, right? So Central? Yeah. It's 9 a.m. our time. If you want to learn more, go to drupalcommerce.org/blog/tags/commerce-2x. All these stories I brought up is kind of like the development blog, going in wrote stories about why we made these decisions and how they impact. And they're also really interesting because if you're wondering what this whole like get off the island, a lot of the initial posts are about that with working with our libraries and having to get the Google dataset updated and getting like commit access, or not commit access, but getting the ability to submit a patch. If you go to drupalcommerce.org/contribute/2.x, there's some additional information. We want documentation to really kick butt in 2.x because in 1.x, it wasn't really there. Like there's a site builder's guide on drupalcommerce.org, there's a site builder's guide on drupal.org, but it's very meh, in a lack of better terms. So we actually have docs.drupalcommerce.org, which is built using Gitbook, and Josh Miller, who was at Commerce Guys and is now at Acromedia, has been really charging the lead there. And it's helping document not only Drupal Commerce, but the dependencies we use and how they make sense. Like the zone stuff for address, there's like a page and a half on there that explain how to properly use it, which is great. So if you don't know code, but you know how to, you can go into a UI, click around, and see how to use something, GitHub lets you submit pull requests without needing to pull it down. You can edit in line. So if you want to even contribute to documentation, there's a way to. And that's the hardest part about open source, is documentation, because no one's getting paid to write that stuff. Like when you have software, like you have to pay somebody to write the documentation because you can't sell a product with it. Well, open source, we're chasing our own tails to build it, right? Like when you're doing open source, you're using it part-time or on some sponsored time, so you tackle critical bugs. We're working to write documentation, but it would be great to have a hand in that sense as well. So I want to open, before I actually open up to questions, it's 11:47 already, I signed up for a BOF at 2:15 in room B, which is in the awesome room upstairs. So if you do have questions or general architecture questions or just like want some more info, I'll be hanging out there, jamming out. Milan, they churned out a whole bunch of pull requests and patches I need to review, so I'm going to get my nose down. If you want to learn how to contribute, and sit down and do a little mentoring on that too. If you just want, or you have general D8 questions, I'm more than willing to help out there too. So I will take a few questions while we got time. Yeah.
So in Drupal 7 Commerce 1, it was terribly complicated to build a nice email message receipt. If you had multiple line items, you'd have to make this big rule component and loop through everything and build it and send it to the customer. And how are you addressing that?
Okay, so to reiterate, emails in Commerce 1 were abhorrible. There wasn't really a default solution. And how are we going to make that better? Well, we do have Commerce Message in 1.x, but I don't think people really know about it, and it provides an order summary view that renders that. But if you didn't know that it was there, it was this hard task. I actually started porting Commerce Message to 2.x. We haven't fully agreed on our solution, but I believe it's going to be, what I would like to do is keep going without an email solution and work on Commerce Message on the side using the message stack, which involves sending email, supports email, SMS, they're all plugins. And then hopefully get that merged into Commerce Core once it's satisfied, but I want to have one canonical solution for emails. This allows you to create message types, which have a body text, so you can actually go into the WYSIWYG and type stuff out. It fully supports tokens. Now, obviously, there's a kicker here. Token in D8 isn't quite what we knew it as D7. Some patches landed thanks to the sprinters at Milan that bring it there, but like chain references are still kind of out there. But that's what I'm hoping to do. Already, I have it ported with tests that checkout. It sends an email to the customer and the admin, and I want to add in more things of that sort, like receipts. But this is where our first rules integration might come from. My task today is also to investigate rules and see how hard it is to embed a rules UI for a message. So with Commerce Message, you would get this fully functional system that lets you say, on this event, send this email if. Or send this message if, because remember, a message could just get written to the log. It could be sent as an email. It could be sent as an SMS. You know, what if somebody wrote a Slack plugin for message. Send a Slack ping that like, hey, you got an order, your fulfillment team goes to it. That's my vision for it. And I know I said I've been half-time with Commerce 2.x. It's been about like half of that time has been core, the other half has been contrib, and making sure that we have canonical solutions in contrib, because there's too many people trying to do it too many different ways. So I've taken on myself to try and make sense of our contrib ecosystem, because there's 450 modules just for Drupal Commerce. Wait, I thought, was there a hand over here or something? Okay.
I use invoice receipt in 7 for one of my clients because she's somewhat paraplegic, and so it's hard for her to go into the orders and look.
Yeah.
So I was using that to send a copy of the invoice directly to her, and it's really complicated in the work with rules and the completed message coming through. You know, I'm trying to see that, and so I ended up writing a rule that said, you know, you had to look at the order and see that if it paid, so the total had to be 0 and whatever. But is there going to be anything like that in?
That's
is that
what.
the message that
Yep.
you're talking
So
about?
message stack, message is like an entity that lets you save a thing. Like Drupal Commons uses it because it represents like an activity feed. And with message notify, it turns those into things you can email. It's just basically saying like, this is something that represents a message that needs to go somewhere. It's just an abstract concept, but it's just called the message stack because there's all kinds of things you can do with it. That's what we're going to be doing. The nice part about state machine and workflows, I realize that we need to write this patch, but what I want it to do is every time a transition happens, it fires an event. Now, if you're not familiar in D8, things are moving to the Symfony event dispatcher, where it fires off this thing happened. So what's happening is there's the event dispatcher which says, hey, this event went off. Do something instead of just module invoke. So what we would do is, I want state machine on every transition to say this transition is happening. So if it transitioned to completed, you knew that it was paid, right? An order isn't complete until it's paid. So rules would listen in on that transition event and let you fire that. And I want to make the UI for configuring that simple, because that's my one argument against rules. Like, it is verbose. It lets you do a lot of things, but if you try to, you need to know code, because going through that UI and configuring something that's this long, like every time I touch rules, I write my own code. That it just adds that one thing and my code does everything. But for at least message or where it really matters, I want to try to minify that UI that says, here's this event, here's my message types I can pick, here's the conditions. Now obviously the conditions, that's where it might get verbose, but you need that there. But to keep it as simple as possible, because an e-commerce system needs communication.
Yeah.
And like I said, one of our main points looking back is how do we make your lives easier? And that's one thing, by communication, on top of any defaults we provide in the core.
Will a developer be able to add more steps to a state machine?
Yes, it's a YAML file. So workflows are based on the plugin. There's workflow groups, and then you define the workflow. So like a group, like out of the box, we have 4 examples actually. Default with validation, default fulfillment, and default fulfillment with validation. Just when there's validation, there's always like a validate step in there, which would be like your stock checks. So yeah, go to modules, order, like commerce order workflows.yaml. All right there. Saw another hand shoot up over here. Sorry.
I don't do much e-commerce or any real e-commerce, but I do have a couple of clients that run membership sites. And in Drupal 7, I put UberCard in because it was that and it was done.
Yeah.
Commerce looked like an awful lot more work.
Because there's commerce license billing, then you want to make sure you have commerce card on file, commerce recurring. Yeah. So the question was about subscription sites, which we know is a bread and butter thing. I think one of the ports is actually a subscription-based site. In July, I believe we might have somebody working on the port to commerce license billing, which doing a subscription model is going to be simpler in 2.x because we support recurrent, like payment methods in core. So we just need to write a recurring Commerce recurring will probably be ported. We probably won't support recurring payments in Commerce itself, since it's so use case.
Mine don't need recurring payments.
All right, they just sign up the one time, they get that. Then
We just need to manipulate the role and,
yes.
either create an expiration or extend it as the case may be.
So I think in July somebody's going to start working on that sandbox, and I honestly think like a senior developer that knows Commerce doing that's probably a month. Porting modules in V8 isn't too hard until you get to the really, really, really fine points. Then it takes longer because you need to agree on it. But I think for the most part, somebody might be starting on that in July, and hopefully, like when we have our first release, like we could have license. That's our push. Commerce Migrate, the ability to migrate from UberCart 6, D7 Commerce, all that is actually being worked on right now. So my goal is to have a lot of our contrib issues solved before we do when we get our final release done. It's not a blocker of the final release, but we know people need those things. Hannah?
So you got half my question, actually, but the other half was bundles.
Like product bundles?
Yeah, and I have one use case that you'll hate because I hated it. We had a physical product bundled with a recurring subscription.
That, I don't know. I feel like, so that's come up in every talk, and I feel like we had a good answer to it, but it's totally escaping me. I know at DrupalCon there was a good discussion about it, but I always try to find a way to abstract it, right? So a bundle, well, there's actually a D7 module that somebody wrote, and I'm hoping they put it to D8, where it literally just turns your edit cart form. Instead of each variation being like a different thing, it's a different option. So like your bundle, you would have like your physical, then your subscription product, and then it's added to the cart at the same time. But you need it to be, if they remove one, it removes both, right?
Yeah.
Well, Chris dived into it a little bit. We have a purchase entity interface, which anything that implements the purchasable entity interface can be added to the cart and bought. So that's why we did this, because product bundles are a pain and extremely complex. So let's say that commerce bundle or whatever it is that the contrib name is, I've never had to actually implement these. I found ways to work around it. Let's say it implements that interface, because again, it's oops, we can say like this interface, things must implement this because we know how to interact with it. So our purchasing system is completely replaceable. So if you have a bundle, you would create some kind of an entity that implements this interface and then is able to be bought and checked out and has all of its own logic. So really, you could run commerce without commerce product. Well, no, you need commerce product in some sense, but like you don't need our product entity. You could create your own system. Now, the amount of work that goes into that, I'm not sure, but that's how bundle will kind of work. If I recall, like all of our conversations, like we have an interface, we have ways to, it's all abstracted to some sense. That way, you could have your own purchasing entity and workflow and all that stuff. Big challenge, but it's there. Yeah.
Can you touch real quick on shipping?
Shipping. So at MidCamp, which if you don't, at MidCamp in March, we sat down and tried to architect it, and it got like, it was a little bit there. Because shipping's hard. I had Sean McCabe from Acromedia sit down with Andy Giles from Blue Oak Interactive. Both did a lot of shipping stuff, and they started clashing heads. Like, you get to this one canonical version. It's like, this will work, because shipping isn't just getting rates, it's packaging, it's shipments, it's tracking numbers, it's a lot. But at New Orleans, I sat down with Sean, we have an architecture. I need to see how far they're implementing it. In a week, I'll actually be flying out to their headquarters for a 5-day sprint with their company, which I'm hoping to really jam on that. But with shipping, we'll provide the default, like there's a shipping service or shipping carrier, whatever terminology you want to go with, that gives you rates. That's going to be a pluggable architecture, so that way each rate could just be a YAML file. So table rate shipping will be out of the box available. You extend the class, do whatever you want. There will be packages, which will then talk to boxes, and you'll be able to have like a pluggable packaging algorithm. So that way you can say, here's the boxes I get. Out of the box, everything would default to like one box, all that. There would be shipments. So each order has a shipment that says what line items are in that shipment, which then has a tracking number. So we could do going to the whole email thing. On shipment create, boom, shoot out an email. On shipping create, boom, send out an email. So that way they have all their tracking numbers. on each individual email or the thing as a whole. It's a complex topic that didn't have a very robust solution in 7. There's commerce shipping, commerce fulfillment, and commerce packaging, and like commerce box. We're trying to condense all those into one thing. So that way you turn it on, you can do flat rate shipping out of the box, and then when you have unique use cases, you can implement it. And hopefully FedEx, UPS, all that will just be able to implement it so you turn it on, then you're done. Because it's definitely too hard now. Any other questions or? No.
So you're solving a lot of complex problems with this new suite of tools.
Yes.
Is there any plan or roadmap to get to a simple solution like Kickstarter?
I don't know if we're going to do Kickstart, just because when you enable Drupal Commerce now, you get that. In a sense, you don't get the demo data, but I have a demo sandbox that imports data for you and creates a default store, makes t-shirts, lets you buy some t-shirts going on. I need to update it with some schema changes. But when you do that composer create project and use our project base, it gives you a base profile that turns things on, puts the shopping cart block up there, and gives you our default config, which the idea is that when you do that, you have Commerce Kickstart sans the bloat. You don't have a catalog, but I want to know how we can provide an out-of-the-box catalog solution. Problem is, everybody wants their catalog a little bit different, and how do you all overriding it? It's a little hard, but I know some people want Commerce Kickstart 3. I want to talk to the Acro Media folks about building a Commerce Bootstrap, and in 2 we support. It was an Omega theme. Omega is great. I loved Omega 3, but realized everybody uses Bootstrap. So if we make a Bootstrap-based layout, people can at least extend it, customize it, have their willy-nilly ways with it. That's still up into the air. I mean, I want to provide a demo sandbox so people can at least try it, but I think it's going to be my sandbox module, and then find a way to present it more. Like I'm making Docker images that have it, so that way if I need to give a demo, I can click a button and I have a fully fledged sandbox right there. Like simply test.me, but for commerce. Cool. Neat. Is it time to wrap up? It is time to wrap up. So. Thank you for letting me tell you about the